The coffee shop near Elmendorf Air Force Base buzzed with the usual morning crowd. Airmen in pressed uniforms grabbed quick breakfasts before reporting for duty, while civilians hurried past with briefcases and phones pressed to their ears. Maya Chen sat quietly in the corner booth, her small frame nearly hidden behind a laptop screen. She wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. To anyone watching, she looked like a college student cramming for finals, not one of the most skilled pilots to ever graduate from the Air Force Academy. The men at the table behind her spoke loudly enough that she couldn't help but overhear. They were discussing the upcoming red flag exercises, the massive military training operation that would bring pilots from around the world to Alaska for realistic combat scenarios. "I heard they're bringing in some hotshot from the 494th, one voice said. "Supposedly this pilot has never lost a dogfight simulation." His companion snorted. "Probably just got lucky against some rookies. Real combat is different than computer games. The name's Chen or something. Sounds foreign. Probably one of those exchange pilots who looks good on paper but can't handle the real thing." Maya's fingers paused over her keyboard. She had heard variations of this conversation more times than she could count. The assumptions, the dismissals, the casual prejudice wrapped in military bravado. After 12 years in the Air Force, she had learned to let most of it slide off her back. Today felt different, though. Today was important. She closed her laptop and gathered her things. In 3 hours, she would be suiting up for the most complex air combat exercise ever designed. 12 experienced pilots from 6 different countries would face off against an unknown aggressor squadron. The rules were simple: engage and eliminate all hostile aircraft while protecting friendly ground assets. What the participants didn't know was that the aggressor force consisted of just one pilot flying multiple sorties in rapid succession. That pilot was Maya. The drive to the base took 15 minutes through the crisp Alaskan morning. Maya had requested this assignment specifically. She was tired of being underestimated, tired of having her abilities questioned before anyone had seen her fly. The red flag exercise would be different. Here, performance was the only thing that mattered. Colonel James Harrison stood in the briefing room, addressing 12 of the most accomplished pilots in the Allied forces. British, German, Australian, Canadian, and American aviators sat in neat rows, their flight suits bearing the patches of elite squadrons. These men and women had accumulated thousands of flight hours and dozens of commendations between them. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Red Flag, Alaska," Harrison began. "For the next 3 days, you'll face scenarios designed to test every aspect of your combat training. Today's exercise is particularly challenging. Intelligence suggests a single aggressor pilot of exceptional skill. Your mission is to locate and eliminate this threat while protecting our simulated ground installations." Flight Lieutenant David Ashford of the Royal Air Force raised his hand. "Sir, did you say a single pilot?" "That's correct. Our opponent today has volunteered to fly multiple sorties with minimal rest periods. I should warn you, this individual's record in air combat exercises is unprecedented." Major Hans Müller from the Luftwaffe shifted in his seat. "What aircraft will we be facing?" "F-22 Raptors, same as most of you will be flying. The playing field is level in terms of equipment. The difference will be in skill and tactics." Captain Sarah Williams from the Royal Canadian Air Force looked skeptical. "With all due respect, sir, how can one pilot effectively engage 12 experienced aviators? Even with multiple sorties, the fatigue factor alone—" Harrison smiled grimly. "That's exactly what we're here to find out, Captain. Your opponent believes it can be done. I suggest you take this challenge seriously." Across the base, Maya was conducting her own pre-flight briefing with her ground crew. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, her crew chief for the past 3 years, ran through the aircraft systems check with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, I've got to ask," Rodriguez said as he secured a panel on the Raptor's wing. Taking on 12 pilots in one day? Are you sure about this? Maya pulled on her flight helmet and checked the seal. The aircraft is ready, right, Sergeant? Yes, ma'am, she's perfect. All systems green, full fuel load, and I've triple-checked every component. Then I'm ready too. Rodriguez had worked with Maya long enough to recognize the quiet confidence in her voice. He had seen her prepare for dozens of training flights and several real combat missions. She never bragged, never showed off, but she never lost either. Still, this was different. The other pilots have been asking questions about you, he mentioned as he helped her into the cockpit. What kind of questions? The usual stuff. Background experience, how you got assigned to this. I think they're trying to figure out if you're some kind of political appointment. Maya strapped herself in and began her pre-flight checklist. What did you tell them? I told them they'll find out soon enough. The F-22 Raptor was a marvel of modern engineering. Capable of supercruising at speeds over Mach 1.5 without afterburners, equipped with advanced stealth technology, and armed with both air-to-air missiles and a 20mm cannon. In the right hands, it was virtually unstoppable. Maya had been flying Raptors for 8 years, and she knew every system, every capability, every limitation. As she taxied toward the runway, Maya reviewed the tactical situation in her mind. 12 enemy aircraft would launch in 3 waves of 4. They would have numerical superiority, coordination advantages, and the benefit of mutual support. Her advantages were different. Complete freedom of movement, no need to coordinate with wingmen, and the ability to engage on her own terms. The tower cleared her for takeoff. Maya advanced the throttles and felt the familiar surge of power as the Raptor's twin engines spooled up. The aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into the Alaska sky. Within minutes, she was climbing through 20,000 feet and heading toward the exercise area. Viper 1, this is Control, came the voice in her headset. You are cleared to engage when ready. First wave launching now. Viper 1 copies, beginning patrol pattern. Maya leveled off at 35,000 feet and activated her radar. The system immediately detected 4 aircraft climbing rapidly from the south. Flight call signs Hawk 1 through Hawk 4 were coming up fast, likely planning to gain altitude advantage before beginning their search pattern. The first rule of air combat that Maya had learned as a young lieutenant was that altitude equals energy, and energy equals options. The pilot who controlled the vertical dimension of the battlefield usually controlled the outcome. But there were exceptions to every rule. Instead of climbing higher, Maya descended rapidly and activated her aircraft's stealth mode. The F-22's radar signature became virtually invisible, while her own sensors remained fully active. She watched as the 4 enemy aircraft reached 40,000 feet and began their search pattern, looking for her above them. Maya positioned herself directly underneath their formation and waited. The Hawk flight spread out in a line abreast formation, each aircraft separated by several miles. They were disciplined pilots flying a textbook search pattern. Unfortunately for them, Maya didn't believe in fighting textbook engagements. She selected Hawk 3, the aircraft on the far right of their formation. Her targeting system locked onto the aircraft and indicated a clear shot with her AIM-120 missile. Maya waited until the enemy pilot began a turn that would temporarily separate him from his wingman. Fox 3, Maya announced calmly as she launched her first missile. The simulation system registered a direct hit. Hawk 3's aircraft immediately began transmitting the electronic signature that indicated a destroyed aircraft. The pilot would have to return to base, effectively removing him from the exercise. The remaining 3 pilots reacted immediately, breaking formation and beginning defensive maneuvers. Maya had already anticipated this response. As they scattered, she selected her second target and fired again. Fox 3, second engagement. Hawk 2 was eliminated before his wingmen could locate Maya's position. The stealth technology that made the Raptor so deadly in combat also made it nearly impossible to find when the pilot knew how to use it properly. Hawk 1 and Hawk 4 converged on Maya's last known position, but she was already gone. Using the Raptor's supercruise capability, she had moved 15 miles north and was climbing back to intercept altitude. The two remaining pilots found empty sky where they expected to find their opponent. "Where the hell did she go?" Hawk 4 transmitted, forgetting proper radio protocol in his frustration. Maya smiled inside her helmet. The pronoun told her that word of her identity had already spread among the opposing pilots. Good. She wanted them to know exactly who was defeating them. She positioned herself behind and above the two searching aircraft. Both pilots were flying defensive patterns now, constantly changing altitude and direction to avoid being targeted. They were good pilots employing sound tactics. Against a conventional opponent, their defensive flying would probably work. Maya was not conventional. She dove down behind them and closed to within gun range before either pilot detected her approach. The F-22's cannon was loaded with training rounds that registered hits on the target aircraft's sensors. Maya lined up behind Hawk 4 and squeezed the trigger. "Guns, guns, guns!" she announced as the training system recorded multiple hits. Hawk 4 was eliminated, leaving only Hawk 1 from the first wave. That pilot immediately went into a series of radical defensive maneuvers, trying to force Maya into an overshoot that would put him in position for a counterattack. Maya had seen this tactic before. Instead of following Hawk 1 through his evasive pattern, she climbed straight up and waited. The enemy pilot eventually had to level out or risk stalling his aircraft. When he did, Maya was positioned perfectly for a vertical attack. Her final missile of the engagement eliminated Hawk 1, completing the destruction of the first wave. Total time, 11 minutes. "Control, this is Viper 1, Maya transmitted. "First wave eliminated. Ready for second wave." In the control tower, Colonel Harrison watched the tactical display with growing amazement. The 4 red icons representing the Hawk flight had disappeared from his screen in rapid succession. His radar operators confirmed that all 4 aircraft were heading back to base, their electronic systems indicating simulated destruction. "Sir, second wave is requesting a tactical update before engagement," his communications officer reported. Harrison picked up his microphone. "Wolf Flight, this is Control. Be advised that first wave was eliminated in 11 minutes. No damage sustained by aggressor aircraft. Recommend extreme caution and coordinated attack patterns." On the other end of the radio, Major Susan Martinez of the United States Marine Corps felt a chill run down her spine. She was leading Wolf Flight, 4 experienced pilots flying F-35 Lightning IIs. Each member of her team had combat experience and hundreds of hours in high-performance aircraft. "Copy that, Control. Wolf Flight understands the threat level." Martinez switched to her flight frequency. "Wolf 2 through 4, you heard that. We're dealing with an exceptional pilot. Stay tight, watch your spacing, and remember that our opponent is flying solo. No matter how good they are, they can only engage one of us at a time." The second wave launched 15 minutes after the first wave's destruction. Maya used the time to refuel from an aerial tanker and review her tactical options. The Marine pilots would likely fly a more conservative approach, staying together and using mutual support to counter her advantages. As Wolf Flight climbed toward the combat area, Maya descended from above once again. But this time, she positioned herself between the enemy formation and their base. If she could force them into a defensive position, their coordination advantages would become liabilities. The Marine pilots spotted Maya's aircraft on radar as soon as she revealed her position. 4 F-35s immediately turned toward her, launching missiles from maximum range while maintaining their formation integrity. Maya counted 6 incoming missiles and began her defensive sequence. The F-22's combination of stealth, speed, and maneuverability made it extremely difficult to target with radar-guided weapons. She turned perpendicular to the incoming missiles and deployed chaff to confuse their guidance systems. 5 missiles missed cleanly. The 6th passed close enough to trigger a proximity warning, but caused no simulated damage. Maya had survived the Alpha strike. Now it was her turn. The 4 Marine pilots were still in formation, expecting Maya to run from their superior numbers. Instead, she turned directly toward them and accelerated to combat speed. The closing rate between the opposing aircraft exceeded Mach 2. Maya selected Wolf 3 and fired 2 missiles in rapid succession. The Marine pilot attempted to evade, but Maya had calculated the intercept perfectly. Both missiles found their target. As Wolf 3 fell out of formation, Maya used her speed to separate from the remaining 3 aircraft. She climbed rapidly and turned back toward the enemy formation, which was now trying to regroup after losing another wingman. Wolf 2 made the mistake of separating too far from his flight leader while maneuvering to avoid Maya's next attack. Maya immediately exploited the gap, diving down between the 2 aircraft and targeting Wolf 2 from close range. "Guns! Guns! Guns!" she transmitted as her cannon eliminated the 2nd Marine aircraft. Wolf 1 and Wolf 4 were now facing the same problem that had destroyed the first wave. They were outnumbered by an opponent who could engage and disengage at will. Their formation tactics, designed for coordinated attacks against multiple enemies, were useless against a single highly skilled adversary. Maya climbed back to altitude and began stalking the 2 remaining aircraft. Both pilots were flying defensively now, constantly maneuvering to avoid being targeted. But defensive flying was a losing proposition in air combat. Eventually, one of them would make a mistake. Wolf 4 made his mistake first. While turning to avoid what he thought was Maya's attack position, he allowed his aircraft to enter a slight climb that reduced his speed. Maya pounced on the opportunity, diving from above and firing her remaining missiles. Wolf 4 was eliminated, leaving only Major Martinez. The Marine Major was an experienced pilot with over 3,000 flight hours and 2 combat deployments. She knew that her only chance was to force Maya into a close-range dogfight where pilot skill and aircraft performance would matter more than tactics and positioning. Martinez turned directly toward Maya's position and accelerated to afterburner speed. If she could get close enough, she might be able to use her aircraft's superior turning ability to gain an advantage. Maya recognized the tactic immediately. The F-35 was more maneuverable than the F-22 at close range, and Martinez was clearly an accomplished pilot. A turning fight would be dangerous. Maya decided not to give her the opportunity. Instead of accepting the close combat engagement, Maya used the F-22's superior speed to maintain separation while maneuvering for a cannon shot. It took nearly 5 minutes of careful flying, but eventually Martinez had to choose between maintaining her defensive posture and pursuing Maya aggressively. She chose aggression. As soon as Martinez committed to an attack run, Maya reversed her turn and positioned herself behind the Marine's aircraft. The F-22's cannon found its target for the final time in the 2nd engagement. "Control, this is Viper 1, Maya transmitted. "2nd wave eliminated. Requesting clearance to land for refuel and rearm. Total elapsed time for the 2nd wave, 18 minutes. As Maya's aircraft touched down on the runway, she could see ground crews already preparing for her rapid turnaround. Fresh missiles were being loaded while fuel trucks topped off her tanks. The efficiency of her maintenance team would be crucial for the final engagement. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez met her as she climbed down from the cockpit. "Ma'am, the other pilots have been asking a lot more questions about you." Maya removed her helmet and shook out her hair. "Still curious about the political appointment theory?" "Not exactly. Now they want to know if you're even human." Maya smiled for the first time that day. The final wave of pilots would be the most challenging yet. They would have learned from the mistakes of the first 2 waves, and they would be flying with the knowledge that their opponent had already eliminated 8 experienced aviators without taking a single hit. In the briefing room, the 4 remaining pilots studied the tactical data from the previous engagements. Flight Lieutenant Ashford from the RAF, Major Mueller from Germany, Captain Williams from Canada, and Captain Jennifer Brooks from the U.S. Navy represented the most experienced pilots in the exercise. Colonel Harrison addressed them with unusual gravity. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this, people. You're facing something we've never seen before. 2 complete waves eliminated with 0 losses. Your opponent is demonstrating tactical awareness and flying skills that are frankly unprecedented." Captain Brooks leaned forward. "Sir, what do we know about this pilot's background?" "Classified beyond your current need to know. What I can tell you is that you're dealing with someone who has redefined what we thought was possible in single aircraft operations." Major Miller studied the engagement timelines. "The speed of these eliminations suggests our opponent is making decisions faster than should be possible. Either this pilot is taking enormous risks that happen to be paying off, or what, Major? Or we're dealing with someone who can process tactical information and execute responses at a level we've never encountered before." The 4 pilots exchanged glances. Each of them had thought they understood the limits of human performance in air combat. The data from the morning's exercises challenged everything they believed about those limits. Flight Lieutenant Ashford spoke quietly. "What's our tactical plan?" Harrison stood up and moved to the tactical board. "You're going to do something that no fighter pilot likes to do. You're going to fly as a single unit with no individual initiative, complete coordination, no separation, no independent maneuvering. You move as one aircraft, you think as one pilot." Captain Williams looked skeptical. "Sir, that formation flying removes all of our individual advantages. We'll be predictable, limited in our maneuverability." "Captain, individual advantages haven't worked. Superior numbers haven't worked. Coordinated attacks haven't worked. We're going to try something different." Harrison turned back to the group. "Your opponent's greatest strength appears to be the ability to isolate and eliminate individual aircraft. Take away that ability by never giving her a single target." The pronoun hung in the air for a moment before Captain Brooks spoke up. "Her?" Harrison realized his mistake immediately. That information is still classified. But the damage was done. The 4 pilots now knew they were facing a female aviator, which added another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. Military aviation remained a male-dominated field, and unconscious biases could affect tactical decision-making in combat situations. Major Mueller was the first to verbalize what they were all thinking. "How many female pilots have this level of air combat capability?" Harrison's expression became stern. "Major, that line of thinking is exactly how 8 of your colleagues ended up eliminated this morning. Your opponent's gender is irrelevant to their ability to kill you in simulated combat. I suggest you focus on tactics rather than demographics." The 4 pilots nodded, but Harrison could see that they were still processing the information. He hoped that knowledge of their opponent's identity would make them more cautious rather than more complacent. As the final wave prepared for launch, Maya completed her pre-flight checks for the 3rd time that day. She had been airborne for nearly 2 hours already, and physical fatigue was beginning to factor into her decision-making process. The final engagement would test her endurance as much as her flying skills. Rodriguez secured the last panel and stepped back from the aircraft. "Ma'am, word is that the last 4 pilots are planning to fly in tight formation. No separation, no individual maneuvering." Maya nodded as she settled into the cockpit. "Smart tactical adjustment. They're trying to eliminate my ability to isolate single targets." "Will it work?" Maya started the engines and began her taxi toward the runway. "We'll find out, Sergeant. We'll find out." The final engagement was about to begin. The final wave launched at exactly 13:47 hours. Maya watched from 30,000 feet as 4 aircraft lifted off from Elmendorf in perfect formation. Even during takeoff, they maintained tight spacing that would have impressed an aerobatic team. Flight Lieutenant Ashford led the diamond formation with Major Muller on his right wing, Captain Williams on his left, and Captain Brooks flying close formation behind him. Maya had to admit their tactical adjustment was sound. By maintaining tight formation, they eliminated her ability to pick off isolated aircraft. Any attack she made would immediately draw response fire from all 4 pilots. Their mutual support was now maximized, while her freedom of maneuver was severely restricted. But Maya had faced formation tactics before, and she understood something that many pilots forgot. Every tactical advantage came with corresponding disadvantages. Tight formation flying required constant attention to spacing and position. The pilots would be focused on not colliding with each other as much as they were focused on fighting her. More importantly, they were now limited to the maneuvering capabilities of their least skilled pilot. "Control, this is Viper 1, Maya transmitted as she began her descent toward the combat area. "Final wave in sight. Beginning engagement sequence." "Copy." "Viper 1, final wave is designated Eagle Flight. Be advised they are flying unusual formation parameters." Maya smiled grimly. The controllers were warning her about the tactical change, but she had already identified the enemy formation's strengths and weaknesses. The question was whether she could exploit those weaknesses before the superior numbers and firepower of Eagle Flight eliminated her. The 4 enemy aircraft climbed steadily toward 30,000 feet, maintaining their diamond formation with precision that spoke of hours of practice. Maya realized they had probably been drilling this specific tactical formation since the destruction of the first wave. These pilots were adapting to her capabilities in real time. At 28,000 feet, Eagle Flight leveled off and began a search pattern. Instead of spreading out to cover more area, they moved as a single entity. Ashford called the heading changes, and all 4 aircraft turned in unison. Their radar coverage overlapped completely, making it impossible for Maya to approach from any angle without being detected. Maya climbed to 35,000 feet and observed their pattern for several minutes. The formation was tactically sound, but it had one critical flaw: predictability. Because they had to move as a unit, their maneuvering options were limited to what the entire formation could accomplish safely. She decided to test their formation discipline. Maya descended rapidly and approached Eagle Flight from their 6 o'clock position, directly behind their formation. Her stealth technology kept her hidden until she was within missile range of the trailing aircraft. Captain Brooks. At the last possible moment, Maya activated her targeting radar and achieved missile lock on Brooks. The sudden radar signature immediately alerted all 4 pilots to her position. "Contact! 6 o'clock low!" Ashford shouted into his radio. The entire formation reacted instantly, breaking into a coordinated defensive turn that maintained their spacing while presenting a more difficult target. Maya found herself facing the nose of 4 enemy aircraft, all with weapons systems trained on her position. But Maya had already anticipated this response. Instead of pressing her attack on Brooks, she disengaged immediately and climbed away from the formation at maximum speed. She had achieved her real objective, forcing Eagle Flight to react as a unit and revealing their defensive capabilities. The 4 pilots regrouped quickly and resumed their search pattern, but Maya had learned valuable information. Their formation discipline was excellent, but the coordinated defensive maneuver had taken nearly 15 seconds to complete. In air combat, 15 seconds was a lifetime. Maya positioned herself above and ahead of Eagle Flight, using her aircraft's superior climb rate to gain altitude advantage. The enemy formation was methodically searching the sky below them, unaware that their quarry was now above and in front of their position. When Eagle Flight reached the northern boundary of the exercise area and began their turn back south, Maya struck. She dove from above, targeting not the aircraft themselves, but the space between them. The F-22's cannon had an effective range of over a mile, and Maya had calculated the precise angle needed to engage multiple targets simultaneously. "Guns! Guns! Guns!" Maya transmitted as she fired a burst that forced all 4 pilots to break formation or risk collision. The formation scattered instantly. Captain Williams broke left, Major Muller broke right, Captain Brooks dove, and Flight Lieutenant Ashford climbed. For the first time in the entire exercise, Maya was facing 4 individual aircraft rather than a coordinated unit. She immediately selected Captain Brooks, who had dived below the others and was attempting to regain altitude. Maya's first missile found its target before Brooks could rejoin the formation. 3 aircraft remained, and they were trying desperately to regroup. But formation flying under combat conditions was different from training exercises. The stress of being attacked, combined with the need to avoid both enemy fire and friendly collisions, made precise formation flying nearly impossible. Major Muller made the first mistake. While maneuvering to avoid Maya's second attack, he allowed his aircraft to drift too close to Flight Lieutenant Ashford's position. Both pilots were forced to break apart to avoid collision, giving Maya the opening she needed. She targeted Muller with her remaining missiles, eliminating the German pilot before he could rejoin his wingmen. 2 aircraft remained, Ashford and Williams. The British and Canadian pilots immediately went into a defensive weave pattern, alternating turns that made it difficult for Maya to target either one without being engaged by the other. It was a sound tactic, but Maya had been expecting it. Instead of trying to target either aircraft directly, Maya positioned herself to attack their pattern rather than their position. She climbed above the weaving aircraft and waited for the precise moment when both pilots would be turning away from each other. When that moment came, Maya dove between them and targeted Flight Lieutenant Ashford with her cannon. The British pilot was forced to break off his defensive pattern to avoid the simulated gunfire, leaving Captain Williams temporarily isolated. Maya immediately reversed her attack and engaged Williams with her remaining ammunition. The Canadian pilot's aircraft registered multiple hits and was eliminated from the exercise. Only Flight Lieutenant Ashford remained. David Ashford was arguably the most experienced pilot in the entire Red Flag exercise. He had over 4,000 flight hours in high-performance aircraft and had flown combat missions over 3 different theaters of operation. As Maya maneuvered for her final attack, she was facing a pilot who understood air combat at the highest levels. Ashford immediately recognized his disadvantage and attempted to change the parameters of the engagement. Instead of running or trying to escape, he turned directly toward Maya's position and accelerated to combat speed. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me," he transmitted over the radio. Maya respected the aggressive move. Ashford was forcing her into the type of close-range dogfight that she had been avoiding all day. At close range, pilot skill and aircraft performance mattered more than tactics and positioning. The British pilot was gambling that his experience could overcome Maya's advantages. The 2 aircraft approached each other at a closing speed of over Mach 2. Maya held her course until the last possible moment before breaking into a vertical climb. Ashford followed, matching her maneuver and forcing the engagement into the vertical plane. What followed was a display of aerial combat that would be studied in fighter pilot schools for years afterward. Both aircraft climbed, dove, and turned through 3 dimensions of airspace in a deadly dance of thrust and lift. Maya's F-22 had superior performance characteristics, but Ashford's experience showed in every maneuver. For 8 minutes, neither pilot could gain a decisive advantage. Ashford matched every one of Maya's moves with a countermaneuver that prevented her from achieving a firing solution. Maya found herself in the longest air combat engagement of her career against an opponent who refused to make mistakes. The turning point came when both aircraft reached the operational ceiling of their performance envelopes. At 50,000 feet, the thin air made maneuvering sluggish and engine response slow. Maya realized that the pilot who made the first aggressive move would probably determine the outcome of the engagement. She chose to dive. Maya pushed her aircraft into a steep descent, building speed while maintaining visual contact with Ashford above her. The British pilot had two choices: follow her down and risk being trapped in a disadvantageous position, or maintain altitude and allow Maya to escape. Ashford chose to follow. The two aircraft dove toward Earth at speeds approaching Mach 2.5. Maya monitored her altitude carefully, knowing that she would have to pull out of the dive before reaching the safety floor of the exercise area. But she also knew that Ashford would have to make the same decision. At 15,000 feet, Maya began her pull-out maneuver. The G-forces pressed her into her seat as the aircraft's nose came up, and she leveled off at 10,000 feet. She immediately looked back to see where Ashford had positioned himself during the dive. The British pilot had made his mistake. In an attempt to stay with Maya through the high-speed dive, Ashford had positioned himself directly behind her aircraft. When Maya pulled out of the dive, he found himself in perfect firing position, but with no escape route. Maya immediately reversed her turn and brought her nose around toward Ashford's aircraft. "Guns, guns, guns," Maya transmitted for the final time. Flight Lieutenant Ashford's aircraft registered multiple cannon hits and was eliminated from the exercise. The engagement was over. "Control, this is Viper 1, Maya reported. "All hostile aircraft eliminated, requesting permission to return to base." There was a long pause before the controller responded. "Viper 1, control copies. All hostiles eliminated. Total time for final wave, 27 minutes. You are cleared to return to base." Maya turned toward Elmendorf and began her descent. Behind her, the wreckage of 12 military careers lay scattered across the Alaska sky. Not real wreckage, of course, but something almost as devastating: the complete destruction of everything these pilots thought they knew about air combat. As her aircraft touched down on the runway, Maya could see that a crowd had gathered near the flight line. Ground crews, off-duty pilots, and base personnel lined the taxiway to watch her aircraft taxi in. Word of the morning's exercise had spread throughout the base. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez guided Maya's aircraft to its parking position and chocked the wheels. As Maya shut down the engines and began her post-flight checklist, she could hear the crowd outside growing larger. She climbed down from the cockpit and removed her helmet. The assembled personnel fell silent as they got their first clear look at the pilot, who had just redefined air combat training. Colonel Harrison approached Maya as she completed her post-flight inspection. "Captain Chen, that was the most impressive display of air combat skills I've seen in 30 years of military service." "Thank you, sir. The aircraft performed flawlessly, and my ground crew deserves credit for the rapid turnarounds." Harrison studied Maya's face, looking for signs of fatigue or stress. She appeared calm and composed, as if she had just completed a routine training flight rather than the most challenging air combat exercise ever designed. "Captain, I have to ask, how did you do it? 12 experienced pilots, 3 separate engagements, 0 losses. The tactics you employed today are going to change how we approach air combat training." Maya glanced at the crowd of pilots and ground personnel who were still watching from a respectful distance. She could see the faces of the defeated pilots among them. They looked stunned, confused, and perhaps a little angry. "Sir, I think the real question isn't how I did it, but why everyone was so surprised that I could do it." Harrison frowned. "I'm not sure I understand." Maya handed her helmet to Sergeant Rodriguez and looked directly at the colonel. "Sir, how many of those pilots spent time researching my background before today's exercise?" "I would assume all of them. That's standard pre-mission planning." "And what did they find?" Harrison thought for a moment. "Your service record is impressive, Captain. Top of your class at the Academy, advanced fighter training, combat decorations, instructor pilot qualifications, all of which should have told them that this exercise would be challenging. But did any of them take that information seriously, or did they see a small Asian woman and assume the records were somehow inflated?" The question hung in the air between them. Harrison realized that Maya was addressing something much larger than tactical aviation. She was talking about assumptions, prejudices, and the dangerous consequences of underestimating opponents based on irrelevant characteristics. Captain, are you suggesting that their preconceptions affected their tactical planning? Maya looked at the group of defeated pilots again. Several of them were engaged in animated discussions, probably trying to understand how their carefully planned tactics had failed so completely. Sir, I'm suggesting that the most dangerous enemy any pilot can face is their own assumptions. When you assume your opponent is less capable than they actually are, you make tactical errors. When you make tactical errors in air combat, people die. Harrison nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that the morning's exercise had been about more than testing flying skills. It had been a demonstration of how unconscious bias could affect professional judgment in life-or-death situations. What would you recommend for future training exercises, Captain? Maya smiled for the second time that day. More exercises like this one, sir, but next time, don't tell the pilots anything about their opponent except aircraft type and number. Let performance speak for itself. As Maya walked toward the debriefing room, the crowd of observers began to disperse. The defeated pilots gathered in small groups, discussing what they had witnessed and trying to process the implications for their own flying careers. Flight Lieutenant Ashford approached Maya as she reached the building entrance. His expression was a mixture of respect and bewilderment. Captain Chen, I wanted to congratulate you on an exceptional performance today. That last engagement, I've never experienced anything like it. Maya stopped and turned to face him. Thank you, Flight Lieutenant. You flew an excellent defensive pattern. In a real combat situation, your experience would make you a formidable opponent. Ashford seemed genuinely puzzled. Captain, how did you process tactical information so quickly? The decision-making speed you demonstrated today seems almost superhuman. Maya considered her answer carefully. Flight Lieutenant, what do you see when you look at me? The question caught Ashford off guard. I'm sorry? When you were preparing for today's exercise and you heard that your opponent would be a pilot named Chen, what did you picture in your mind? Ashford's expression became uncomfortable. Well, I suppose I didn't give it much thought. And when you learned that the pilot was female? Captain, I don't see how that's relevant to air combat capabilities. Maya nodded. You're absolutely right. It shouldn't be relevant. But tell me this. How much time did you spend studying my service record versus how much time you spent wondering about my background, my qualifications, my right to be in that cockpit? Ashford was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was subdued. I think I understand what you're saying. The fastest way to process tactical information is to focus entirely on tactical information. When part of your mental capacity is distracted by irrelevant considerations, your reaction time suffers. Today, 12 pilots were fighting two opponents, me and their own assumptions. That's a battle they were never going to win. As Maya entered the debriefing room, she reflected on the morning's events. The exercise had accomplished its primary objective, demonstrating her air combat capabilities to a group of skeptical pilots. But it had also revealed something more important about the hidden costs of prejudice in high-performance environments. She thought about the conversations she had overheard in the coffee shop that morning. The dismissive comments, the casual assumptions, the immediate categorization based on name and nationality. Those same attitudes had probably influenced the tactical planning of every pilot she had faced. Maya realized that her greatest advantage in the exercise hadn't been her flying skills or her tactical knowledge. It had been the fact that her opponents had underestimated her from the beginning. They had made assumptions about her capabilities based on factors that had nothing to do with piloting ability, and those assumptions had created blind spots in their tactical thinking. The irony was that the very prejudices that had motivated Maya to request this assignment had also ensured her success in it. Her opponent's inability to see past their preconceptions had given her tactical advantages that no amount of training could have provided. But Maya also knew that the lesson would be temporary. Word of her performance would spread throughout the military aviation community, and future opponents would not make the same mistake. Her advantage of being underestimated would disappear as soon as her reputation caught up with her abilities. That was fine with Maya. She had never wanted to win because of her opponent's mistakes. She wanted to win because she was the better pilot. The morning's exercise had proven that point beyond any reasonable doubt. As she sat down to begin the formal debriefing process, Maya wondered what challenges lay ahead. The red flag exercise would continue for 2 more days, with new scenarios and new opponents. Word of her performance would spread, and the remaining pilots would approach their engagements with a very different set of expectations. But Maya was confident that changing expectations wouldn't change outcomes. She had spent 12 years proving herself in a profession that seemed designed to exclude people like her. Every challenge had made her stronger, every doubt had sharpened her focus, and every victory had prepared her for the next test. The morning's exercise was over, but Maya Chen's war against underestimation was just beginning. The debriefing room at Elmendorf Air Force Base had never hosted a session quite like this one. 12 of the world's most accomplished fighter pilots sat in uncomfortable silence as Colonel Harrison reviewed the tactical data from the morning's exercise. The numbers on the screen told a story that challenged everything they thought they knew about air combat. Engagement duration, 56 minutes total. Hostile aircraft eliminated, 12. Friendly losses, 0. Ammunition expenditure, 67%. Harrison's voice was measured and professional, but Maya could hear the underlying amazement. Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed today represents a fundamental shift in air combat effectiveness. Major Susan Martinez raised her hand. The Marine pilot still looked shaken from her encounter with Maya during the second wave. Sir, I need to understand something. The tactical decisions made by our opponent today, the speed of target acquisition, the predictive maneuvering, the ability to process multiple threats simultaneously. How is that level of performance possible? Maya leaned forward slightly. This was the question she had been expecting, and her answer would determine how the military aviation community processed the morning's events. Major Martinez, how many variables do you typically consider when planning an attack run? Martinez thought for a moment. Aircraft performance, target position, threat assessment, egress routes, wingman positioning, maybe a dozen primary factors? And how long does that analysis usually take? In combat, 3 to 5 seconds for routine engagements, maybe 10 seconds for complex scenarios. Maya nodded. Those are normal response times for normal tactical situations. But what if I told you that I was processing over 30 variables simultaneously and completing that analysis in under 2 seconds? Flight Lieutenant Ashford spoke up. Captain Chen, that would require computational abilities beyond normal human limits. Would it? Or would it require a different approach to information processing? Maya stood and moved to the tactical display screen. Every pilot in this room learned to fly using the same basic methodology. Identify threats, assess options, execute maneuvers, evaluate results. It's a linear process that works well in training environments where variables are controlled and predictable. She touched the screen, highlighting the flight paths from the morning's engagements. But real air combat isn't linear. It's a dynamic system where every action creates multiple reactions, and every reaction changes the tactical landscape. Most pilots try to impose linear thinking on a non-linear environment. Captain Williams from the Royal Canadian Air Force looked skeptical. Are you saying you've developed some kind of new tactical methodology? Maya smiled. I'm saying I learned to think like the sky instead of thinking about the sky. The room fell silent as the pilots tried to process what Maya was telling them. Colonel Harrison prompted her to continue. Traditional air combat training teaches pilots to control their environment through superior tactics and firepower. But the sky can't be controlled, only understood. Instead of trying to force the engagement to conform to my plans, I let the engagement develop naturally and positioned myself to take advantage of the opportunities that emerged. Major Muller from the German Air Force frowned. That sounds like you were improvising rather than following established tactical doctrine. Not improvising, Maya corrected, flowing. Every engagement today followed predictable patterns because all of you were trained to respond to specific threats in specific ways. Once I understood those patterns, I could position myself not where you were, but where you would be. Captain Brooks, who had been eliminated in the third wave, shook her head. But that level of predictive analysis, it's like you could read our minds. Maya returned to her seat. I didn't read your minds, Captain. I read your training. Every maneuver you made today was something you learned in flight school, practiced in simulation, and executed under controlled conditions. The problem was that you were fighting a training scenario while I was fighting an actual air battle. The distinction hung heavy in the room. These pilots had distinguished careers and combat experience, but Maya was suggesting that their fundamental approach to air combat was flawed. Harrison cleared his throat. Captain Chen, what you're describing sounds like intuitive tactical awareness, but intuition can't be taught in conventional training programs. With respect, sir, I disagree. Intuition is just pattern recognition operating below the level of conscious thought. Any pilot can develop this capability if they're willing to abandon conventional tactical thinking. How? The question came from Captain Williams, and Maya could hear genuine curiosity in her voice. Maya considered her answer carefully. What she was about to say would either revolutionize fighter pilot training or mark her as a dangerous maverick who couldn't be trusted with conventional operations. You stop flying against opponents and start flying with the sky. You stop trying to control the engagement and start becoming part of it. You stop thinking about what you want to happen and start feeling what's actually happening. Major Martinez leaned back in her chair. Captain, you're talking about some kind of mystical approach to air combat. Am I? Let me ask you this. When you're flying formation, do you consciously calculate the exact stick movements needed to maintain position? No, of course not. That becomes automatic after enough training. So your aircraft becomes an extension of your body, and formation flying becomes as natural as walking. What I'm describing is the same process applied to air combat. The tactical environment becomes an extension of your awareness, and maneuvering becomes as natural as breathing. Flight Lieutenant Ashford spoke quietly. How long did it take you to develop this level of capability? Maya thought back to the beginning of her journey. About 8 years. The first 6 years were spent unlearning conventional tactics. The last 2 years were spent learning to trust what I was feeling rather than what I was thinking. Colonel Harrison made notes as Maya spoke. He realized that he was witnessing the emergence of a completely new approach to air combat training. If Maya's methods could be taught to other pilots, it would represent the most significant advancement in fighter aviation since the development of radar-guided missiles. But Harrison also recognized the institutional challenges that Maya's success would create. The military aviation community was built on standardized training, predictable tactics, and proven methodologies. Maya was suggesting that the most effective air combat required abandoning all of those foundations. Captain Chen, Harrison said, I want you to understand the implications of what you've demonstrated today. If your performance can be replicated by other pilots, it will change how we approach air combat training throughout the Allied forces. Maya nodded. I understand, sir, but I also want everyone in this room to understand something else. The performance you witnessed today wasn't just about flying skills or tactical innovation. It was about the advantages that come from being consistently underestimated. The room became very quiet. Maya had just introduced the elephant that everyone had been carefully avoiding. Every pilot I faced today made the same fundamental error. They assumed that someone who looked like me couldn't possibly be as capable as their own experience suggested I was. That assumption created blind spots in their tactical planning that I was able to exploit. Major Mueller shifted uncomfortably. Captain, are you saying that our performance was affected by unconscious bias? I'm saying that bias isn't unconscious when it affects tactical decision-making, Major. When you spend mental energy questioning your opponent's qualifications instead of analyzing their capabilities, you create vulnerabilities that a skilled opponent will exploit. Captain Brooks spoke up. But surely our tactical planning was based on objective assessment of threats and capabilities. Maya pulled up the radio transcripts from the morning's engagements. Let me read you some quotes from today's exercise. Quote, how can one pilot effectively engage 12 experienced aviators? Quote, probably just got lucky against some rookies. Quote, sounds foreign. Probably one of those exchange pilots who looks good on paper but can't handle the real thing. The pilots who had made those statements looked embarrassed, but Maya continued. Every one of those comments reflects tactical planning based on assumptions rather than evidence. You approach today's exercise with preconceived notions about my capabilities, and those notions affected how you flew against me. Flight Lieutenant Ashford raised his hand. Captain Chen, assuming you're correct about unconscious bias affecting our performance, how do we address that issue in future training? Maya smiled. The same way you address any other tactical weakness, Flight Lieutenant. You identify it, you understand it, and you train to overcome it. Colonel Harrison leaned forward. What would that training look like? Anonymous opposition training. Pilots engage opponents without knowing anything about their background, experience, or identity. Performance becomes the only measure of capability. Wouldn't that eliminate valuable intelligence about enemy pilots? In real combat situations, detailed intelligence about individual enemy pilots is rarely available anyway. Most air engagements involve unknown opponents flying unknown aircraft with unknown capabilities. Training against anonymous opponents would actually be more realistic than current methods. The logic was compelling, and Harrison could see the other pilots nodding in agreement. Maya had not only demonstrated superior air combat skills, she had identified a fundamental flaw in how those skills were taught and evaluated. Captain Williams asked the question that everyone was thinking. Captain Chen, how many other pilots like you are out there? People with exceptional capabilities who are being overlooked because of irrelevant characteristics? Maya paused before answering. The question touched on something much larger than military aviation. It addressed the broader issue of how talent was recognized and developed in any high-performance environment. I think there are probably more than we realize, Captain, but the current system makes it very difficult for unconventional pilots to demonstrate their full potential. How so? Because the system assumes that the best pilots will look like the pilots we already have. When someone doesn't fit that profile, they face additional scrutiny that their conventional counterparts don't experience. That scrutiny creates barriers that prevent them from reaching the positions where their true capabilities would be recognized. Major Martinez nodded slowly. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we assume that certain types of people can't be elite pilots, we create conditions that prevent them from proving us wrong. Exactly. And the result is that we miss out on potential improvements to our overall capability. Colonel Harrison realized that Maya had just outlined a compelling argument for fundamental changes to military aviation training and personnel policies. Her performance in the morning's exercise wasn't just an individual achievement. It was evidence of systemic inefficiencies in how the military identified and developed talent. Captain Chen, I'm going to ask you a direct question. How many other pilots do you know who have capabilities similar to yours, but haven't had the opportunity to demonstrate them? Maya thought carefully before responding. Sir, I can think of at least a dozen pilots in my personal network who have shown exceptional potential, but haven't been given opportunities to prove themselves in high-profile exercises like this one. What's preventing them from getting those opportunities? The same factors that prevented me from getting them until I specifically requested this assignment. Assumptions about who belongs in elite positions, combined with evaluation systems that favor conventional approaches over innovative thinking. Harrison made more notes. He was beginning to understand that the morning's exercise had revealed problems that extended far beyond air combat training. Maya had identified institutional barriers that were preventing the military from maximizing its human potential. Captain, what would you recommend as the next step? Maya stood and moved back to the tactical display. I recommend that we replicate this exercise with other pilots who have been requesting opportunities to prove themselves. Not just female pilots or minority pilots, but anyone whose capabilities might be greater than their current assignment suggest. You're talking about a comprehensive review of pilot assignments and advancement opportunities? I'm talking about a merit-based system that evaluates pilots on their actual performance rather than their perceived potential. The current system works well for conventional pilots in conventional roles, but it fails to identify and develop exceptional talent that doesn't fit conventional profiles. Flight Lieutenant Ashford spoke up. Captain Chen, assuming such a system could be implemented, how would it affect unit cohesion and traditional military culture? Maya turned to face him directly. Flight Lieutenant, how did this morning's exercise affect your confidence in your own abilities? Ashford thought for a moment. Honestly, it made me realize that I have significant room for improvement. And how do you feel about that realization? Motivated to become a better pilot. Maya nodded. That's how a merit-based system would affect military culture. It would create motivation for continuous improvement rather than satisfaction with current capabilities. The room fell quiet as the pilots considered Maya's words. She had presented them with a compelling vision of how military aviation could evolve, but she had also challenged fundamental assumptions about how elite institutions should operate. Colonel Harrison closed his notebook and stood up. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that today's exercise has been educational in ways we didn't expect. Captain Chen, I want to thank you for a remarkable demonstration of air combat capability. Maya remained seated. Sir, I hope the real lesson from today isn't just about air combat capability. I hope it's about the importance of evaluating people based on what they can actually do rather than what we assume they can do. Harrison nodded. Point taken, Captain. I can assure you that this exercise will be studied at the highest levels of Military Aviation Command. As the debriefing session ended and the pilots began to file out, several of them approached Maya individually. Flight Lieutenant Ashford was the first. Captain Chen, I wanted to apologize for any assumptions I made about your capabilities before today's exercise. Maya shook his hand. Flight Lieutenant, the assumptions weren't personal. They were institutional. The important thing is that you recognize them now. Major Martinez was next. Captain, I've been flying fighters for 15 years and I've never experienced anything like what you demonstrated today. Would you be willing to share some of your training methods? Absolutely, Major. But remember that the methods are only effective if you're willing to abandon conventional tactical thinking. After today, I'm ready to abandon anything that makes me a better pilot. One by one, the defeated pilots approached Maya to express their respect and request guidance. Maya realized that her victory in the air had accomplished something more important than demonstrating her flying skills. It had opened minds that had been closed to new possibilities. As the room emptied, Colonel Harrison approached Maya one final time. Captain Chen, I have one more question. Was today's exercise really about air combat training, or was it about something larger? Maya smiled. Sir, I think you already know the answer to that question. Harrison nodded. I want you to know that there will be people in the Pentagon who won't appreciate the implications of what happened here today. Change is always threatening to people who benefit from existing systems. I understand, sir, but I also think there will be people who recognize that maximizing human potential is essential for national security. I hope you're right, Captain. I hope you're right. As Maya walked back to the flight line, she reflected on the day's events. The exercise had accomplished its immediate objective of demonstrating her capabilities to skeptical colleagues. But it had also initiated a larger conversation about talent, potential, and institutional barriers. Maya knew that changing military culture would be more challenging than defeating 12 fighter pilots. Cultural change required sustained effort over years or decades, while air combat victories were measured in minutes. But she also knew that every journey began with a single step. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting by her aircraft when Maya returned to the flight line. "Ma'am, I've been hearing some interesting conversations around the base today." "What kind of conversations?" "Sergeant, pilots asking questions about training opportunities, assignment policies, advancement criteria. Seems like you got people thinking about things they hadn't considered before." Maya began her post-flight inspection of the F-22. "That was always the real objective, Sergeant. The air combat exercise was just a means to an end." Rodriguez nodded. "Ma'am, can I ask you something? How long have you been planning today's demonstration?" Maya paused in her inspection and looked at her crew chief. Rodriguez had been supporting her flying for 3 years, and she trusted his judgment completely. "Honestly, Sergeant, I've been planning this my entire career. Every time someone questioned my qualifications, every time I was passed over for opportunities, every time I had to prove myself in situations where others were given the benefit of the doubt, all of that was preparation for today." "And was it worth it?" Maya looked across the flight line at the group of pilots who were still discussing the morning's events. She could see animated conversations, heated debates, and serious discussions about air combat tactics and training methods. "Ask me in 10 years, Sergeant. If the military aviation community is more open to unconventional talent and innovative thinking, then yes, it was worth it. If nothing changes except that 12 pilots have a new respect for my flying skills, then no, it wasn't worth it." Rodriguez finished securing the aircraft and stepped back. "Ma'am, based on what I'm seeing today, I think you're going to be satisfied with the results." As Maya walked toward her car, she thought about the coffee shop conversation that had started her day. The dismissive comments about foreign exchange pilots and political appointments seemed like ancient history now. In 12 hours, she had fundamentally changed how a select group of elite pilots thought about capability, potential, and performance. But Maya also knew that real change would require more than one exceptional day. It would require institutional commitment to evaluating people based on merit rather than assumptions. It would require training programs that developed unconventional talent rather than reinforcing conventional thinking. Most importantly, it would require leaders who were willing to admit that the current system might not be identifying and developing the best possible pilots. Maya drove home through the Alaskan evening, already planning her next move. The red flag exercise would continue for 2 more days, and she had been assigned to fly additional sorties against fresh opponents. Word of her morning performance would spread, and future engagements would be different. But Maya was confident that changing expectations wouldn't change outcomes. She had spent her entire career preparing for challenges exactly like this one. Every obstacle had made her stronger, every doubt had sharpened her focus, and every victory had prepared her for the next test. The sky above Elmendorf Air Force Base was clear and infinite, full of possibilities that most people never imagined. Maya Chen had proven that those possibilities were real, and that the only limits on human potential were the ones that people imposed on themselves and each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opponents, and new opportunities to demonstrate that excellence could emerge from the most unexpected places. Maya was ready for all of them.